It was a cold, rainy night when 22-year-old Mark, a college student, was driving back to his hometown. The winding road was poorly lit, and the storm made visibility even worse. As he rounded a bend, his headlights caught a figure standing on the side of the road, drenched and shivering. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a white dress that clung to her in the rain. Mark hesitated but decided to stop. He rolled down his window slightly. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. The woman nodded, her face pale and her lips trembling. Without saying a word, she climbed into the back seat. As Mark drove, he tried to make small talk, but the woman remained silent, staring out of the window. Something about her unsettled him, but he chalked it up to the eerie weather and her apparent distress. After a while, she finally spoke, her voice soft and barely audible. "I need to go home. It's just a few miles down this road." Mark nodded and continued driving. He noticed that the woman had started to shiver, so he offered her his jacket. She took it without a word. When they reached her address, it was a rundown house with no lights on. Mark turned to tell her they had arrived, but the back seat was empty. His jacket lay neatly folded where she had been sitting. Confused and a little scared, Mark got out of the car and approached the house. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, an elderly woman answered. "I'm sorry to bother you," Mark began. "I just gave a young woman a ride here. She said this was her home, but she disappeared." The old woman's face turned pale. "You must be mistaken," she said, her voice trembling. "That sounds like my daughter, but she passed away 5 years ago. She was hit by a car on this very road while walking home in the rain." Mark's blood ran cold. He stumbled back to his car, leaving the jacket behind. To this day, he swears he can still feel the chill of her presence in the back seat. Samantha and her friends decided to spend the weekend camping in a remote forest. They had heard rumors about strange occurrences in the area, lights in the sky, eerie sounds, and even disappearances, but they dismissed them as urban legends. The first night was uneventful. They roasted marshmallows, told ghost stories, and laughed late into the night. But on the second night, things took a darker turn. Around midnight, Samantha woke up to the sound of footsteps outside her tent. She assumed it was one of her friends, but when she called out, no one answered. The footsteps stopped abruptly. The next morning, she asked her friends if anyone had been outside during the night. They all denied it, brushing off her concerns as paranoia. That evening, as they sat around the campfire, one of her friends, Jake, pointed into the woods. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Everyone turned to look, but the forest was dark and silent. "See what?" Samantha asked. "I thought I saw someone standing between the trees," Jake said, his voice uneasy. They decided to let it go, but the tension lingered. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Later that night, she woke up again, this time to a low, guttural growl. She froze, her heart pounding. The sound was coming from just outside her tent. Summoning her courage, she unzipped the tent slightly and peered out. In the dim light of the moon, she saw a figure standing a few feet away. It was tall and gaunt, with unnaturally long limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. Samantha let out a scream, waking her friends. The figure disappeared into the woods, but the growling continued, now echoing all around them. Terrified, they packed up their camp and decided to leave immediately. As they hiked back to their car, the sounds followed them, snapping branches, distant whispers, and that same guttural growl. When they finally reached the safety of their car, they sped away, not daring to look back. The next day, Samantha researched the area and discovered that several campers had gone missing in those woods over the years. Locals spoke of a creature that roamed the forest, watching and waiting for its next victim. Samantha and her friends vowed never to return. But sometimes, in the dead of night, she swears she can still hear the growl.